Hello friends, it's Bill here, and you're watching Bill's Box of Sound. And thank you for coming back. It's always a pleasure. And recently there was a video that our good friend Norman Maslov, aka Mazzy, made about the group Yes and his history with that group and what Yes records he likes and does not like. And he did not mean it to be a comprehensive history of the group Yes, although he did make a lot of statements that I really wasn't happy with. And everybody's so obsessed with calling progressive rock Prague. I thought that was a city in Czechoslovakia, but anyway, I've always called it progressive music or progressive rock. And I first started listening to Yes, most likely with the third album, the Yes album. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to not talk about Mazzy's journey with Yes, because that's his. I'm going to talk about mine and talk about Yes records that I have and records that I like. We start with the very first Yes album, which had that on the cover. As a matter of fact, do I still have that? Yeah, I used to have the twofer that had the first and the second album, Time and a Word. Here's the second album, Time and a Word. Here's the first album. I used to have a twofer that was pressed in the UK or Germany, and the cover of that two-record set was the same as the cover of the original UK first Yes album, which was just a black background and this little cartoon Yes. But these Yes albums, their very first ones, I guess they kind of got signed out of the wake of Led Zeppelin being signed to Atlantic Records. And Ahmet Ertegun came to the UK to look for more acts to be signed. And Yes was one of the acts that they did sign. And this first album, of course, everybody centers in on their cover of Every Little Thing by the Beatles. But there's lots of other great songs on here. Beyond and Before, the cover of I See You, and Harold Land, I like that. I wasn't crazy about this album when I eventually got to it. But it's historical and it's great. And this is the original Yes of Bill Bruford on drums, Tony Kaye on organ and piano, Peter Banks on guitar and vocals, Chris Squire on bass and vocals, and John Anderson on vocals and some percussion. Then their second album, which was a growing point for them, Time and the Word, the title cut really nice. And I also really dug their cover of the Richie Havens tune, No Opportunity Necessary, No Experience Needed. And Sweet Dreams, that's a great song, and Astro Traveler. They also cover a Stephen Stills song, Every Days. But yeah, a really good early Yes album, which came out in 1970. Then they got rid of Peter Banks. Peter Banks went to form a band called Flash, which put out two great records. This one, the first one, which is just called Flash, and this second one, which is called In the Can. I think that they should have flipped the two titles of those two albums. They might have been a little bit more appropriate for those looking for the joke. But anyway, that after the first two Flash albums, Peter Banks made a solo album called Two Sides of Peter Banks. And of course, side one and side two. And it had lots of guest stars from the progressive rock world. Had Jan Ackerman from Focus on guitar, Ray Bennett on bass, Phil Collins on drums, one of Mazzy's favorites, of course, Steve Hackett on guitar from Genesis, Mike Huff played drums on one track. And John Wetton of Family and King Crimson and Asia, he played bass on one song. This came out in 1973. And then the last Flash album, called Out of Our Hands, which has all sorts of body parts all over it. This album really was nowhere near as good as the first two. The first two Flash albums, Flash and In the Can, fantastic. If you like early 70s progressive rock and you like the sound of Yes around 1973, oh, jump into that. But getting back to Yes, their next album, simply called the Yes Album, is a masterpiece and is still wonderful to this day. I'll never get tired of listening to this album. And I had a cassette of this album, and one of my early memories is just listening to this cassette over and over again. This album is a very fantastic, mature record. Every single song on here is great. Yours Is No Disgrace, The Clap, which introduces new guitar player Steve Howe right there. Oh, and there's Bill Bruford for you. And then Starship Trooper, still a classic. I've Seen All Good People, Your Move, Adventure, and then of course Perpetual Change. Oh my God, this is great. And to make it even greater, recently it was re-released as a 2LP 45, limited to 5,000 copies, for the Atlantic Records 75th anniversary. And if you're a fan of this album and you want to hear it sound like you've never heard it sound before, this is fantastic. Gotta get it. So we keep on going. Next, Yes comes out with this album called Fragile. And Tony Kaye is gone because he was basically a piano and organ guy and didn't want to spread out much more than that. Strangely enough, he would return to Yes in the future. But Tony Kaye was out, Rick Wakeman was in. And this album was their breakthrough album, with hits like Roundabout, Long Distance Runaround, and long tracks like South Side of the Sky or Heart of the Sunrise. This is another album that's great all the way through. This also got the 75th anniversary double 45, but my favorite pressing is going to stay this one, which was done by Analog Productions, and it was cut by Kevin Gray with the assistance of Steve Hoffman. Y'all know who Steve Hoffman is, don't you? Okay, that's good. So after that, the long songs got even longer, and this album came out, Close to the Edge. This album was a present from my grandmother in 1973. Actually, Christmas 1972, I think. And it's only got 3 tracks on it: Close to the Edge, And You and I, and Siberian Khatru. And this was the last album that Bill Bruford played drums on. But once again, another classic. If you're into progressive rock, this is a must for your collection. There's also a Blu-ray and a remix by Steven Wilson. A lot of these albums have been remixed by Steven Wilson, and he's done some good work on them. Now, after Close to the Edge, Bill Bruford left Yes and would never play on their albums again. And he was replaced by Alan White, who played drums on John Lennon's Imagine album. And they put out the 3-record epic Yes songs. It's a 3-record live album. Yeah, it's a behemoth, but it's a lot of great stuff and a lot of really good versions of these songs. I've been immersing myself in this album for years, and all that great Roger Dean artwork. and Alan White played drums. Well, actually, on Perpetual Change, Long Distance Runaround, and The Fish, Bill Bruford does play drums. So this is Alan White's entrance into playing drums for Yes. And then, according to Mazzy, the record that killed prog music. And I very strongly disagree with that remark. And the name of this record is Tales from Topographic Oceans. Okay? It's not Tale from a Topographic Ocean. No. Tales from Topographic Oceans. A 2-record set. 4 songs, each a sidelong composition. And good old Atlantic, SD2-908. List price was $9.98 when it first came out. This album, another epic. A lot of people really didn't like it, but I loved it. And speaking of those Steven Wilson remixes, when Steven Wilson remixed this album, he made it even better. One of the reasons I don't go back and listen to this is mostly because of the sound of the vinyl. It kind of grates on you after a while, not because of the music, but because of the sound. When Steven Wilson remixed Tales from Topographic Oceans, he really cleaned it up and made it shine. He didn't try to recreate the album. He tried to enhance it and make it sound better, and boy, was he successful. I've been looking for the Blu-ray of this for a long time. I mean, I've heard it because somebody lent me a copy, and it was wonderful. So one day I hope to get either the remixed version on vinyl or the Blu-ray again, if it ever resurfaces. That album didn't kill prog. So, after that album, Rick Wakeman, the keyboard player, he left. And this album, which recently got re-released on the Rhino Hi-Fi series, is Relayer. And their new keyboard player is Patrick Moraz. Who the heck is Patrick Moraz, do you say? Hang on a second. This guy right here, Patrick Moraz. Now, there's only one album of this band that he played in, Refugee. And these other 2 guys are Brian Davidson and Lee Jackson. You might recognize them from a band that Keith Emerson played in called The Nice. This is a pretty damn good album. And it's kind of hard to find. But if you see it and you are a progressive, or shall we say prog fan, it would be in your best interests to pick it up. But let's get back to Relayer, shall we? 3 songs, a little bit like Close to the Edge. Real good stuff, taking them in kind of like a different direction, kind of almost like jazz rock, but a very well-recorded record. And if you pick up the Rhino Hi-Fi, a really, really good sounding record, my copy sounds fantastic as well. Good old classic custom artwork on the labels. And my version has lacquers that were cut by George Peckham. You can tell by the words Porky in the run out. And this was cut from the original UK tapes. Unlike the Rhino, which was cut from an American copy of the tape. Now, I have not invested in the Rhino Hi-Fi copy of Relayer yet, but who knows? Maybe someday it'll fall into my hands and I'll say I made a mistake in not upgrading to that. But this still sounds pretty damn good in my estimation. And this is 1977. So all the members of Yes then went off and made their own solo albums. Bill Bruford already had a solo career, making his own solo albums like Feels Good to Me, One of a Kind, Gradually Going Tornado, and then going off into his jazz group, Earthworks. Lots of good stuff there. But as Yes was taking a break, this album came out, Yesterdays. all sorts of stuff from the first couple of albums, plus the previously unreleased track America, which is a remake of the Simon and Garfunkel tune, which is fantastic on its own from the Bookends album. But the Yes version, oh yeah, I loved it. Yesterdays. And then, miraculously, late in 1977, Rick Wakeman returns from his semi-successful solo career of good but sometimes overblown concept albums to join Yes again and put out this album, Going for the One. By the way, for those of you keeping score, Patrick Moraz left the band and he ended up in the Moody Blues for a couple of years, which has songs like Wondrous Stories, Awaken, Turn of the Century, and Parallels. So 5 songs total on this album. This one wasn't bad, but not as great as the earlier albums. I mean, Yes album all the way through Relayer. Extremely solid stuff. And my favorite Yes albums. But I was faithful. I continued on. They put out this album called Tormato. And man, this is embarrassing. And Rick Wakeman's still with the band. And this album's so bad, they're throwing tomatoes at it. This is the one that had Don't Kill the Whale on it. Release, Release. The Circus of Heaven. Oh, embarrassingly bad. On the Silent Wings of Freedom and Onward, not bad tunes, but not Yes's finest hour with Tormato. Okay, so there was another break in the action for Yes, and oh, what happened? Another live album, a 2-record set called Yes Shows, kind of a sequel to Yes Songs. And on side 2 of this album, they've got The Gates of Delirium from Relayer, played live with Patrick Moraz on keyboards. Here's the gatefold of all of that. And for the rest of the album, that's not The Gates of Delirium, Rick Wakeman does play keyboards on that. Next we have yet another really left turn for the group Yes, and they put out this album called Drama. Yeah, I tried to peel the sticker off. What the hey. What was so weird about this? Well, gone was John Anderson on vocals. Gone was Rick Wakeman on keyboards. And replaced by the producer Trevor Horn on vocals and Jeff Downes on keyboards. Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes had just had some phenomenal success with a little song called Video Killed the Radio Star by their group The Buggles. There's 6 songs on this record, and it's pretty good. Especially Tempest Fugit, which I believe is the last track on side 2. Yeah, it is. But a very different sound for Yes. And that only lasted 1 album. Days were getting dark for Yes fans. Seemed like the band broke up again. Trevor Horn went on to become a really fantastic producer. And, thought that we'd never hear from Yes again. And then this thing comes out. When I first heard anything off of this, a friend of mine who knew that it was already out, and I didn't for some reason, called me up, had me come over. He started playing Owner of a Lonely Heart, and he says, guess what band this is? And I'm listening to it, and it's like, I don't know who the hell this is. And then I hear John Anderson's vocals, and I said, that's the singer of Yes. But he left Yes. And is this a John Anderson solo record? And then the more I get into it, I hear and I hear other guitars in this album, and I said, holy cow, this is Yes. And it's great. The album called 90125, which was named after the catalog number for that title. And, guess who produced the album? Trevor Horn. And this album is produced wonderfully. By the way, this album also got the 2LP 45 RPM treatment by Acoustic Sounds, if it's still available. And it spawned lots of hit singles, such as Leave It, and Changes, and Cinema, It Can Happen. Really good album. So, yeah, Yes is back. Woohoo! Let's keep them going, folks. Let's keep making more progressive music that we love. Then they came out with this album, Big Generator. It's been so long since I've listened to this. Let me pull it out and refresh myself to who the lineup is on this record. It's not 90125, it's 90522. Okay. On this album, John Anderson on vocals. Tony Kaye is back on keyboards. Well, Tony Kaye was on keyboards for 90125 as well, as is Trevor Rabin on guitars. Chris Squire still on bass, still manning the bass section. And Alan White is still on drums and percussion. And this album was produced by, yes, Trevor Rabin, Paul DeVillers, and Trevor Horn, and mixed by Trevor Horn. So production's really good, but the songs just not there. I'm sorry. As a matter of fact, some of the friends that I was hanging out with at that time ended up calling the album Big Masturbator. This is the end of the line for me on Yes. And I know that Steve Howe has come back into the band. John Anderson's left and several other vocalists have taken his place. Rick Wakeman came, he went again. His son joined the band, Rick Wakeman's son playing keyboards. They had other people playing keyboards. And Chris Squire died, and now there are no original members left in Yes. Alan White's passed away as well. By the way, speaking of Alan White, he did make a great solo album called Ramshackled. If you haven't heard it and you're a Yes fan of that era, when they made solo albums, like 75, 77, highly recommended. Anyway, so I've peeked in every now and again and listened to other recent Yes albums since Big Generator. I've really heard nothing that really strikes my fancy. So that's the end of the line for me as far as Yes. I'll always love these records, but the band wore out its welcome for me. And that's that. If you like what you've seen here, please press the like button. Press the subscribe button. Come on back and watch some more videos, why don't you? And you can also, if you're so inclined, pick up my album, by Spudlock. This is some weird music. It's nothing like Yes, but if you're interested, it's available on Bandcamp. So thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Come on back. It really helps out. And hope you have a great day, because I had a great time. Hope you did too.